What's up YouTube? So today we are talking about how to create rubbery squelches. So this request came in from one of my Patreons, Psybur. He was asking about my techniques for creating these kind of rubbery squelches. I also just want to shout out his channel. He's been making some pretty good Psydub, down-tempo kind of tutorials as well, which I'm sure you guys are going to be interested in, so definitely check the description for where to check out his videos. But otherwise, yeah, I want to dive into some techniques that I use to create these kind of really rubbery, plastic sounding squelch sounds. So here I've got a quick project that I've slapped together, and the idea is that I want to talk about some of the kind of techniques that I use to create these squelches. So I'm going to create the sound in Vital, but I'm going to use a plugin called Morph EQ to create the tonal sounds to the squelch. You can do this with various kind of EQs and stuff. I'll show you kind of two techniques to do this, but for now, let's just dive into the actual source sound. We want a saw wave with a pretty low frequency. So what we can do is we can pitch this down 2 octaves. Okay, let's say 3 octaves. And so here, what we want to do is we want to create some kind of envelope that's going to control the pitch of the sound. So what I like to do is I like to use the LFO and set this to envelope mode. And then what this allows us to do is time the amount of time that it takes for the envelope cycle to finish. Then what we can do is we can actually modulate this to get kind of more zappy squelches and kind of variations on the squelch. So check out what I'm talking about here. We can go down even further, so let's say 4 octaves down, so it's minus 48 there. What I want to do here is I want to set the voices to 1 and give it a little bit of glide and legato. So what this means is that if 2 notes are overlapping in the MIDI, it's not going to re-trigger this envelope cycle. So if you kind of overlap, it's going to glide to the next note in the tail of the sound. We can use the macro to kind of determine the sweep that we want for this speed. So the next kind of essential thing to the squelch sound is either a high pass or band pass filter. So let's just set this filter over to 24 dB and let's use a high pass because this way it leaves in more high frequencies for us to alter using processing. So what this does is this creates a kind of squelch in the mid-range. And then what I like to do is we can modulate this with the same LFO. And then here what I like to do is to adjust the mod remap in the matrix so you get a sweep that's kind of more balanced to the mid-range. And then what we can do is we can add a little bit of soft clip here. And here what I want to do is I want to actually reduce the amount of octaves that this sweeps. I find it's going a little bit too high frequency. So we can go enter value and we can punch in the amount of octaves. So let's say 60, which is 5 octaves. Yeah, that already sounds a lot better. Okay, so we've created the basic sound. So what we want to do here is to, I can actually save this. So save, I'm just going to call this squelch tone template. And then here we can move on to the processing. So like I said, I'm going to do this in Morph EQ for the reason that you can actually draw in peaks. And then what we can do is we can draw the shape of how these nodes get modulated over time. So you can get these really complex sweeps that are incredibly easy to control. You see this, how these 2 meet at the center and then go back again. So you can see here, okay, we have a very high boost. What we can do is on this node, turn the volume down on both of these so that the boost isn't as drastic. So you can kind of do these things that you wouldn't really be able to do so easily with traditional EQs. Does that make sense? So yeah, I mean, you could just perhaps, I'm just going to use the kilohertz EQ for this. Here, we've got this thing called offset. So what this does is it kind of just shifts them left or right, but you can't pinch them with a single parameter, or you can't control exactly the frequencies unless you use outside modulations. So we could actually automate these nodes individually, but it just becomes very complex to get these kind of sounds. Whereas with Morph EQ, it's just super simple. So like I said, you don't particularly need this plugin to create these sounds. You can do it with a very simple EQ. And I'm going to kind of show you the frequency ranges, which are the ones that you generally want to look out for, just to make your life a little bit easier. So for now, let's just remove Slice EQ and let's focus in on Morph EQ. So here, what I want to do is just make this a little bit bigger. And we can go back to init preset. So I found for the really plasticky squelches, we want to do EQ bands. We want to focus our attention to the sort of 1000 hertz to 10,000 hertz range, or 1 kilohertz to 10 kilohertz range, because this is where the sound sounds the most crinkly and plasticky. I'm going to sweep these frequencies while I'm playing the squelch sound. Okay, what I want to do is in Vital, let's set the random modulator to modulate the macro which we created, which modulates the speed of that envelope. So each note is going to have a different kind of curve to the squelch. When you start going below 1K, you start to get a little bit kind of nasally and organic sounding. So what I'll do is I'll take this into account and kind of dip frequencies below this range and then boost frequencies in the kind of range which I feel is going to make it sound the most plasticky. And then we can just kind of create some kind of modulation curve around this sound. So do you remember when I was saying in this context, we want to use a high pass filter because we want a lot of that high frequency range to play with. If we had used a band pass filter, we wouldn't be able to do this kind of frequency altering, these kind of boosts in the 1 to 10K region, because the band pass filter would have cut a lot of that frequency range out. So notice how when I do thin peaks like this, it starts to sound very resonant and again starts to sound very organic. When we're boosting, when we're using wide Q factors, then it starts to sound less organic and resonant, and it starts to sound a little bit more plasticky. So I think that this is slightly the opposite with the low frequency sounds, or at least we don't get that resonant effect, but we start to remove too many frequencies when we do wide cuts like this. So in the mid-range, I generally just do these like mid-cuts just to change the harmonic structure of the sound to get these variations. So once we've got something that's sounding decent, let's just play around a little bit with this. Okay, so now let's start creating a modulation pattern, which we can use this morph parameter over here to sweep with. So what I want to do is I want to select one of these nodes. We can just hover the mouse until we get this plus icon, and then we can just drag a shape. So let's say, for example, just move these nodes. Let's just do a simple thing where this just moves up and then down again. And then we can move these bottom peaks around a little bit, just to create some variations. So now what happens is when we sweep the sound, this does that pattern. Check this out. So here you see that this boost starts to get a little bit too hectic. We can actually reduce the single node here, like this, so it's not as drastic of a peak in the mids. Okay, let's see how the sweep sounds. So with these sounds, you really hear the magic with slightly longer notes. So what I want to do is I want to use a chance to reduce the amount of notes that are happening here. So here we're going to use a random Bitwig modulator and use it to modulate the morph parameter in morph EQ. And then we can just play around a little bit with the sound. And then just for added extra, I'll go into the patch and perhaps we can modulate the octave. So what we want to do is we can, in this note transpose, we can use another modulator from Bitwig. Let's use the random. But here, what I want to do is set this to hold and set this to note so that each time a note is triggered, it's going to generate a random value. And so watch how it's going to jump the octaves here now. Awesome. That is about it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me know what you think in the comments. As always, if you haven't yet, please consider subscribing to my channel and hitting that like button. And I'm going to be uploading this preset to my Patreon for all my $5 supporters, both the Vital preset and the Morph EQ preset. So if you want to know what that's all about, check out the link in the description. Anyway, I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.